Welcome everyone to Lawed Up. This is Brian Jackson, your host and attorney. And this podcast, we talk about the legal world, trying to help everyone understand legal concepts, the law a little bit better. It's a completely foreign thing. And so we're trying to help educate people so they can get better understanding how the legal world works and how legal topics work. And today we're talking about the First Amendment. Very, very important topic to talk about today. First Amendment pretty much is what made this country the way it is. And first part, I'm just going to go off history, why it's so important, maybe things you may have not thought about, and then we'll go into a little bit more about the legalese, things you didn't think about, First Amendment, things you may not have known, and how the First Amendment works, and some important decisions that may have come out as a result of the First Amendment from the Supreme Court. So first of all, I would say that the most important invention for us was the Gutenberg press, and that was so important. Before that, books were created by hand, line by line. Took a long time to recreate what somebody else had written, a lot of effort, and then also a lot of issues with consistency and whether or not it was properly transcribed. And then because of how long it took, just can't distribute writings from other people that much. And so education, very, very important. Bouncing ideas off of each other, very, very important. If not, then everyone would be at ground level every time they're born, because they wouldn't have the same ideas, concepts that people may have come up with prior. So everyone essentially in life recreating the wheel every time. And so books just puts you in, just puts us on a level that everyone else had made prior to us. A lot of other reasons books are important, and we'll get into that more too. But so you have this Gutenberg press that came out, so books can be distributed at a far faster pace than everyone else, than it was in the past. And then books can also be at that, so books could be brought to other people as well, who didn't have as much education. Obviously, that took quite a while for that to happen. It didn't happen just overnight on just more of the lay people getting books. It was more to the rich, but still very important. And we talk about Christopher Columbus, and there's a lot of people who aren't biggest fans of Christopher Columbus and his history, but still very important what he did nonetheless. And a big reason why he decided to go west, essentially, was and what got the wheels in his brain turning was reading the writings of Marco Polo and his adventures out east, China, on the Silk Road. And so he wanted to go out there and wanted to find a fast, efficient way to get there. And so that's why it's important. You're bouncing ideas off one another. You're learning from other people and what they've found, and also learning from people, their mistakes. So very, very important First Amendment, and also very important how the press kind of shaped European views after a while and seeped into America. And that's big reason why we have our First Amendment rights here, and they were important too because they kind of first time the little man had a voice that could be echoed, not just in front of a crowd, but could be echoed through time and in large areas and locations. And back in the day, Catholic Church had a big hold on Europe, whether for good or for worse for a lot of people, and how they perceive it. And I'm not trying to bash the Catholic Church or anything, but big thing that came out there was when it comes to democracy and pushback on government was Martin Luther, and how Martin Luther saw what he thought were some issues with the Catholic Church and started publishing his own papers and kind of pushing back on kind of original thought. And yeah, so that's a big reason why the press was important too, because if somebody disagreed with how things were being done, that disagreement could move a lot farther and could gain a lot more traction than just going out stumping it and just trying to preach to everyone personally. And that was important too in England, and a big thing in London that kind of caught on in the Americas too was this pushback on the government that could be done through just distributing pamphlets. And literacy rates still weren't the greatest back then, but a lot more people could read, especially in London. And so a lot of people's thoughts on government could be passed around. And, we're coming up on Thanksgiving here, talking about the Pilgrims, and a lot of reason why people came to the Americas is they wanted to practice religion the way they wanted to, and not be forced to worship a certain way. And that was very, very important because that kind of ties into the First Amendment too, to be able to think the way you want to think and do what you want to do. So yeah, we get into the colony times, and the England still has a big grasp on these colonists, and so you have this pushback that you have with the Revolutionary War, and you have the Declaration of Independence that came out. And you go through the Declaration of Independence and you can see how freedom of speech was important as well. And they bash the King of England, and they go off on how, we've gone to England all these times. We've asked for all of these things and we're not getting it. And so they're saying for all these reasons, we're not being heard, we're not being listened, even though we tried. And so it's just gotten to the point where we've got to cut ties. And I've mentioned John Locke in some of my podcasts too, and John Locke was important too. He was a philosopher, and he talked about the importance of government and the role of government and what a government should do. And one of his big things was related to I should be able to exercise religion the way I want to. I should be able to be charitable. I should allow me to be charitable to those around me. And so those writings of John Locke were obviously important to those in the American colonies too, and that rang true to them. And they kind of used those principles in coming up with the Declaration of Independence and later the Constitution, and saying that the government should be more for the people and helpful, like a tool for people in their prosperity, and not necessarily as a hindrance. And essentially said that at this point, the king and what he was doing was a hindrance. And so they separate, and then in the Bill of Rights wasn't initially planned to be put in the Constitution, and some people thought that, hey, it's kind of a given. We don't need to necessarily spell it out in the Constitution, but ended up being very important to put it in the Constitution in my mind. And you kind of look at government, and the big thing, what's so amazing about the Constitution and the government and how we set it up is it understands natural tendencies of man, and looking back on history and abuse of power. And if you have someone who is in power for so long that things can just get taken away, and it can take a huge detriment on people as a whole. And sometimes you may have good leaders and may be trying to help out the people, but also you may have leaders that may not have other people's best tendencies in line in thought, and maybe looking out for their own self-interest, but also too understanding that humans are humans and they can only do so much, and running a government requires more than just one human thought and their ideas, and having other people contributing as well to the government and their ideas, which is very, very important. And so you have the First Amendment here that's enacted, that they put in, and we talk about checks and balances and how this government has checks and balances. And we look at the federal government, and there's checks and balances. So you have the president, and he has his duties and powers, and he's essentially the CEO of the government. He is the executor. He's the boss. So he's running the military. He's commander-in-chief of military. He's our chief diplomat. He's / head of state. So he's in charge of diplomacy, international relations, and then also he's in charge of all these government agencies as well, and running those agencies. And those are essentially his main powers, which is kind of funny in my mind, because, and I mean, I would say as president, it's impossible to for one man to run the show again. And our federal government is so big. And when you're running for office as president, you make all these promises and everything and say, we're going to do this, we're going to change that. But then a lot of times in my mind, it's like, okay, well, how are you going to implement that based off the powers that you have? Because presidents, their powers are limited. And when it comes, like if they're promising change in laws and everything, then that requires something beyond the powers of the president, and reaches into more the Congress and what they can do. But yeah, so you have these checks and balances, because the only thing that a president can do is they can sign off on a law. But then you have the Senate, you have 50 individuals in the Senate, and then you have over 400 individuals in the Congress as well that actually come up, write, and negotiate these laws, and has to pass either in the House, then in the Senate, or in the Senate and then in the House. They both have to sign off on it, and then the president can sign it into law. So, and that's a huge thing on checks and balances, and also a huge thing that we have 450 plus people working to put a law together that has to be voted on, and you need a majority vote for this law to be passed, instead of just having one single person pass a law. That's a huge deal, and that again kind of runs into the purpose of the First Amendment, where there can be pushback on someone's decision and idea, and maybe it's a good idea in theory in some ways, but as a whole, it's got to go through the ringer. It's got to go through this political process for it to actually be approved, which is a good thing, because 450 heads is a lot better than one, even though some people may disagree with how crazy politics can be, but very, very good thing. And then also, you have a check and balance on those laws that get passed as well on the Supreme Court level. And Supreme Court is able to review those laws and make sure that they align with the Constitution and other factors they look at, if it's too broad or other issues, or if it's a power that they don't have, and goes beyond the powers that they have as far as passing laws that as it relates to the Constitution. So there's a big check and balance too from those 450 people with the Supreme Court. I mean, a lot of people might say that that's too much power with the Supreme Court, because you have 9 individuals that can overturn the voice of 450 people and the president. So they can overturn 2 branches of government and say, no, we're not going to do this law. And yeah, I mean, I guess 9 judges can also have their political views and their bias and their perspective on life that can seep into the decisions they make, but also they're still bound by the law and still have to make a decision based off the law. But yeah, it's not a perfect system, but it's the best that we have. So on the federal level, we have all these checks and balances, and then also there's a check and balance between the states and the federal government. So the states, they have powers too under the 10th Amendment, and their police powers and laws that they can pass to protect their people and their health. And so there's kind of a check and balance too between the states and the federal government, and the powers that are limited by the federal government and what they can't do, and the powers of the state government and of what they can't do. So there's some powers that are left to the states that aren't governed by the federal government, and that can be a good thing as well, because 450 people, again, may not know every single state and area and needs and economy and social structure. So you have state governments too that are focused on each state, and they can pass laws, and they have their own constitution and branches of government and balance of power too. So that's good as well, that you have these that you have separate legal entities too. But also, if there's an issue with a state law that could run into a federal question and affect and could violate the federal Constitution, and the state Supreme Court comes out with a decision that you don't like, you can take it to the U.S. Supreme Court too. So there's also a check and balance there, and also states can challenge federal law as well, if they think that federal law is an overreach. But also, one thing that's very, very important, what I'm getting to here, is individual rights as well. So we have delegated all this power as a people, and that's how it's supposed to work, is the power is ours, essentially, to be governed. And so what, in theory, how this is working is we're giving some of our power to govern up to someone else. We're delegating our power to these individuals to act on our behalf. So kind of like an attorney, kind of like an advocate on behalf of ourselves, because it's just easier, it's more efficient, We can't. We all have our own lives, and we all have to take care of ourselves. So we all just can't be governing all the time. So we're delegating it. So we're giving the federal government power to do what they do, and we're giving the state government power to do what they do. But there are still some rights that we retain that we don't give the government, or some requirements the government can't infringe on our rights unless they jump through certain hoops. And those are generally considered civil rights, individual rights. So the First Amendment, the government can't infringe on freedom of speech. Generally speaking, the government can't come in and say, hey, you can't say that. Hey, you can't write that. And hey, you can't affiliate with this organization. You can't be part of this religion. You can't be part of this political organization. The government can't step in and take away certain individual rights. And so what it is, the Bill of Rights generally is restraints on government on individual rights, and making sure that power retained by the people isn't taken away. And what stinks is, on the federal level, when it comes to the president and three branches of government protecting their rights, they have a bunch of lawyers and a lot of resources to protect their rights that they have. And then you have the states as well. They have a lot of resources as well to protect states' rights. And so it's a little bit tricky when it comes to individual rights. And so who's protecting individual rights? And so that comes down to just generally attorneys, just general attorneys. If you have a First Amendment issue, then you have to lawyer up and get your own attorney. And it's hard because you don't have the same kind of resources that the state or federal government has. So in a lot of ways, it's an uphill battle and not necessarily a clear playing field when it comes to protecting individual rights, state rights, federal rights. And also, when it comes to that, you're kind of at the mercy of the judges as well, because the judges are the ones who will step in and protect those rights. And a lot of it can come down to the judge's perspectives on your individual rights and how the law works and how the law is interpreted. So it's not necessarily two attorneys, but also you're at the mercy of the judge and how they feel towards your rights and whether or not they think your rights were violated and what they think your rights are, essentially. So it's very important, though, in my mind, that those individual rights are fought for and maintained, because these are powers that individuals have not consented to say, yes, we're giving this up to the government. Yes, we're allowing this. No, we're not allowing it. And if you infringe on it, then we have to go after you. But luckily, too, there has been a statute set up where if the government, either state or federal, violates one of your rights, you can technically sue them for violating your rights. And these are called civil rights claims, but they're also very, very hard claims. They're uphill battles, and likelihood of success is very hard. They usually have like a 33% chance likelihood of success. And that's because you have the governments have immunity. And that's another uphill battle that individuals have to get over compared to states and the federal government. And that is, an immunity was something that we kind of picked up from the English, and it's called sovereign immunity, and essentially what it means is it comes from the theory that the king can do no wrong, which is very ironic. Because obviously you read the Declaration of Independence and we say that, yes, the king can do wrong. But I guess the purpose behind it is also that the government still has to function. The government still has to do what it has to do without fear of getting sued. And so we don't want all these lawsuits piling up and spending public funds trying to defend all these lawsuits, whether or not they're valid or not. So it's trying to put a check on people bringing suit against the state, bringing suit against the federal government. And so I mean, in theory, I mean, thinking of how our government was brought up, that is counterintuitive and kind of, in a way, infringes on your ability to redress government for grievances that you may have and having to get over this sovereign immunity. And so there's certain suits that you can't bring against public officials. And if they're acting in official capacity in some ways, there's some suits you can't bring that they're immune against. And also for you just can't sue them for anything. It has to be for something that violated your rights. And that's how standing works in the legal world. Like, you have to have legal standing. You have to actually be injured. So you just can't say, I don't like what the mayor did, I'm going to sue him and try and fix it. It has to be the mayor did something to you personally that affected your rights that you can sue the mayor for. But also what makes it an uphill battle too is you have to prove that it was intentional. You have to prove that this person intentionally wanted to deprive you of your rights. And most civil rights cases deal with police brutality and someone taking the life of the person. And so the claim there is you deprived this person of their life without due process of law. You were the executor. And you didn't have the power to be the executor. You were just supposed to be the investigator. And even the prosecutor didn't have the power to be the executor. And even a judge doesn't have the power to be the executor. It's a jury that decides whether or not somebody gets a death sentence and whether or not their life should be taken. So that's where it comes down to. But there's obviously a lot of defenses for police officers. And you have to show that they weren't acting in self-defense. They didn't think that you have to show that they didn't think that the person had a gun, and they weren't protecting themselves and others. And so that's why they're very, very hard cases. And you have to think in the mind of the police officer. So it's not necessarily an objective perspective, it's a subjective perspective. And so if the evidence shows, either from testimony or police cam footage, that a police officer was acting in a way that he thought was reasonable based off the circumstances, thinking he was in danger for his life and others, then typically you can't win and get over that sovereign immunity, and then the case gets dismissed. So that's why these cases can be hard. And then also, with any other civil rights cases, you have to prove that they intentionally were violating your First Amendment rights if you think your First Amendment rights are being violated. Also with the Fourth Amendment and your other rights, freedom of religion, there is a way to get around that, though, if instead it was based off a policy enacted by a government agency. If it's the policy that's violating your rights and not the actions of an individual, then you don't have to prove that someone was intentionally violating your rights. You just have to prove that the policy violated your rights. And it's, I guess the Supreme Court has said it's kind of implied that if a person did it, then it could be intentional. And I think that's a greater harm too, is that it's not just a single act by a single individual. It's a policy that can not just affect you, but can affect a lot of people moving forward. And so there's some ways to get around it, but still it's an uphill battle with sovereign immunity. But going specifically to the First Amendment now, and what is good is that the Supreme Court justices, I mean, usually you hear about like these 5-4 decisions that is usually split somewhat politically. There's some judges that are considered more conservative. There are some judges that are considered more liberal. And in a lot of these decisions, you see 5-4 decisions or just a split among the liberals and the conservatives. They just see things differently as it relates to some of these cases. But when it comes to the First Amendment, that is a time where most of the time the stars align and all judges agree, and you can see 9-0 decisions in favor of a First Amendment violation, and so that's a very good thing. And I'm glad that it's happening now. I mean, I hope that continues to be the case. But it's good, at least at this time, that judges see the First Amendment seriously and take First Amendment violations seriously, and it hasn't become a political issue. But, I mean, the thing is that may not be the case all the time. Always. Down the road, it could be different. Hopefully that doesn't happen because, there's nothing necessarily set in stone saying that judges have to rule a specific way. I mean, they still need to follow the law, and hopefully they follow the law. But as of right now, that's a very good thing as it relates to the First Amendment. They're usually 9-0 decisions. When it comes to other rights like the Sixth Amendment right, the right to an attorney, the Fourth Amendment, unreasonable searches and seizures, and also police brutality, the taking of your life, which is kind of rolled into the Fourth Amendment. It is more political, and you see more of these 5-4 decisions. So luckily, the judges can see how important the First Amendment is. And hopefully all of you can see how important the First Amendment is too. And it is still somewhat an oddity worldwide. It's not a widely accepted view per se. And you have countries like China where censorship is still huge. It's ginormous, and it's highly regulated what people can and can't say. And there's potential serious jail time that you can suffer if you speak your mind in China. And same thing in Russia, huge censorship in Russia and what you can and can't say, and serious jail time if you say something against the government. Like in the Ukraine war, I think Russia came out with this law that said that if it was essentially saying that it was against the media, and it said if the media said anything that was anti-Russia or not pro-Russia, that you could face serious jail time, which is hard too because that's a very ambiguous law. Because a lot of things that the media could come out with could be considered anti-Ukraine, even though that person may not have that intention. So very, very hard to operate if you're a member of the press in those types of countries, as well as Iran too. Iran really clamps down on people and them voicing their opinion, as well as other countries such as North Korea. So a lot of those countries, and Venezuela, Cuba, a lot of those countries that are more communist and or dictatorship like, repress freedom of speech. And a lot of people ask, well, how come the United States is killing it economically? Because we only have 300 million people in our country. China has like 1.2, 1.3 billion, and we're still killing it in the economy. And I'm sure a lot of economists would say there's a lot of factors involved, but I mean, I would say that a huge backbone as to why we are killing it is because of the First Amendment. And because we have this free exchange of ideas, and that you can challenge ideas, and that you can come up with a better idea, or you can build off someone else's idea, and you can push back on things, and you can reinvent things or do things differently. And I mean, obviously, a lot of that has to deal with the laws and autonomy that we have as it relates to business, and also our education system. But still, like the main principle of all of this comes from the First Amendment, and that freedom principle, and being able to think and do however you want comes from the First Amendment. I would say that's a big reason too why we're killing it, is that we're able to think and push back, and don't kind of have that rank and file and you're always right kind of mindset that other countries may have. So I've never lived in China. I don't know what it's like to be in China. I don't know what it would feel like to be in that scenario where you just have this mindset that you can't say anything negative about the country. And maybe in China, if you talk to a Chinese person, maybe it's not that big a deal to them, because that's what they're used to, and that's how they've been raised, and that's how their society works, and that's completely fine with them. But if you put in an American into that system, it might feel like complete repression, and like you're getting ripped apart. And so a lot of it may just have to do with perspective, and maybe a lot of people, are fine with that. But I think too, there is a higher law that can help people out, and can help you with your education. And very important to have the First Amendment as it comes to growth, and continuing to learn and find new ideas, and bouncing ideas off people, and being able to disagree with people, and being able to disagree with the government, and being able to post something on social media on something on how and why you disagree, and being able to put your disagreement out there, and being able to get feedback from other people who may disagree with your ideas. I think that's a huge, very, very important aspect to education that a lot of countries are missing out on, and are repressing. And so I think, again, in a lot of ways, socially, we're advanced in that aspect, in being able to have that mindset. So with the First Amendment, again, the government can't infringe on free speech. So like I'm saying here, there's like pretty much a very, very broad range on anything you can say. And I would say too that because of advances in technology, because I'm able to do this podcast, because of social media, just in the past 10 years, 20 years, our First Amendment rights have have gone through the roof, and the ability to reach out to people, and the ability for the individual to have a voice, even greater than what Martin Luther had back in the day. The amplification of our voice has increased drastically, proportionally. So it's and that's a very, very good thing, I think. So just advances in technology help increase our First Amendment rights as well. And then in China, you have people where if you say anything on social media is highly regulated. Again, you can go to jail for it. Yes, I think that we're in a very, very good position, and that our rights continue to increase too, not just how it's written under the law, but how advances in technology increase. And so, again, the Gutenberg Press increased people's rights per se, but then also the laws protecting free speech amplifies that too. So both go hand in hand, the technology and the laws protecting it. So hopefully we'll continue to have laws protecting free speech. And there are just a few exceptions when it comes to free speech, and it relates to safety of individuals. So, a lot of people say I can say whatever I want, but also, number one, the First Amendment only applies to the government. So the government can't infringe on your free speech. So if you have a social media company that comes in and takes down your Twitter account, and that actually happened to me, which is very interesting because at the time my Twitter account got banned, I was advocating for and helping a bunch of people that got arrested related to some protests that they were involved in. And around that time, my Twitter account got suspended. And I don't think I say any outrageous, crazy things on my Twitter account. And so to me, that was a little crazy / suspicious on why my Twitter account was banned compared to a lot of other people who were saying some really false, negative, derogatory, hatred things towards other people. And obviously a lot of bot accounts too swimming around, and I don't know why they were focused on me. It took a long time. It took several years to finally get my Twitter account back. So that's a big fight too. And so that's kind of a thing that we can improve on in America is, I talk about how great it is, but it only applies to the government and the government infringing. So Twitter banning my account isn't necessarily a First Amendment violation unless I can prove that somehow the government was involved in getting my account banned and there was some kind of some kind of collusion there, but I wouldn't ever be able to prove that. So if your social media accounts get banned for whatever reason, then you don't have any recourse. And then also, TikTok is a foreign entity, and that's been a big issue on our political scale. And there's been a lot of pushback. There's actually been a law banning TikTok in the United States. It's already been banned in Canada unless they sell to an American entity. And so TikTok can technically censor you as well. And I've heard about people that have been pro-Ukraine war, where they've been censored. Their accounts been banned for a while, or they don't get as many views as they had. And so that's something that you have to realize too, is that it's not necessarily across the board. I can say whatever I want. Social media is the regulators of free speech now are people who aren't bound to the First Amendment. And so, I mean, it would definitely be great if they had policies that protected the First Amendment more, and were able to self-regulate. But again, that's up to the that's up to the company and whether or not they want to do it. So one issue too with this advancement in technology is the First Amendment, and I guess it's not even the First Amendment. It's just your voice is in the hands of those social media companies. So that's one thing that can be improved on is, the freedom of speech isn't across the board free everywhere. And another big thing too is if you work for a private company, you have no freedom of speech in a private company. And technically, generally, there can be some things that you can say that if they fired you, that may be a violation, but that would have to relate to your right to bargain. Like if you tell them I have concerns about how I'm getting paid and I'm having concerns about pay and you're raising some pay issues or about time off or something about employment and the terms, that could be a violation under the National Labor Relations Board. But if you're just saying something like, I like Trump or I like Kamala or whoever, and they terminate you for it, they could technically do that if you're an at-will employee. So also in all businesses, not just with social media, your freedom of speech is limited too, and you don't have the right to push back on the company and say, I don't think you're doing things right. I don't think that the way things are being run or how things are conducted, how you guys investigate things are right. They can terminate you for that unless it's related to some kind of whistleblower claim. But if nothing latches on, then they can terminate you for that. So there's still a lot of progress here, and there's still not necessarily rights everywhere for you to say and do whatever you want. So if you're a public employee, you have more First Amendment rights, and if you say something and they terminate you for it, that could technically be a First Amendment right violation. But that also, you'd have to look to see whether or not it was work related or something that was just a political issue that they were voicing about. Because if it was more of a political issue, it may not, or if it was more of a work issue, it may not be a First Amendment violation. So your First Amendment rights too aren't completely intact when you work for the federal government as well. And then also in schools, if you're a student in high school, there's been a lot of Supreme Court cases come out as it relates to First Amendment rights in schools. And you definitely do have First Amendment rights, but it is a little more watered down, and there's still some things that can be regulated, but there have been some big decisions like wearing t-shirts or wristbands that are political, and principals stepping in and taking those off could be a First Amendment violation. And then also when it comes to, like, if you're going out in some kind of peaceful movement that you're involved in, there's a time, place, manner analysis as well. And so if it's at 1:00 at night and you're protesting, your First Amendment rights go down too. So your First Amendment rights depend on the time of day, because the later in the day, the more people and sleeping and getting rest kind of takes precedent over people voicing their views. And then also where you're doing it could come into play too. So if you want to go protest at a government facility that's usually restricted, that could be an issue too, or a place where people usually don't protest. Like if you're protesting at the door of the mayor where he lives or the judge, that could be an issue as well as it relates to their rights to privacy and peace and everything, and that could be regulated if and as well as their safety, and so there could be issues with people doing those types of demonstrations. So there are some restrictions. It's not that you can't do anything, say anything. And then also, if your actions are related to violence, if the words that you're saying can incite violence and anger, and you're on the verge of doing something violent, or your words are showing that some kind of immediate force is going to happen. So if you're at a demonstration and you're yelling at someone and you're going to tell them that you're going to beat them up and everything right in front of their face, that's probably not First Amendment protected. So acts of violence, threats of violence that are immediate. So if they're threats that, there's no way that person could follow through on those actions immediately, then could be First Amendment protected. But also, that doesn't mean that the government can't investigate you either. It doesn't mean that they can't, they have to stay away from you. Like if you are making threatening words of violence related to a crime, and someone's safety is at stake, that could be enough evidence for them to go get a warrant and search your phone and search your home to see if there's any other evidence of you inciting violence. Because obviously, if you have people on social media that are threatening to do, we've talked a lot there's been a lot of shootings. If they're threatening to do some kind of shooting and they're making a statement on social media, that could be enough for the police to get a search warrant and search you. So even if it's not immediate per se, and you're not saying I'm going to do this right now. So also there's limits on First Amendment protections, even if it's not immediate, and the government can come in and intrude and search and delve in deeper based off the statements that you're making. And then also the Supreme Court has found that vulgar or I guess more pornographic media is not protected by the First Amendment. And so there's a lot less First Amendment rights that business has and individuals has, and it can be censored by the government, and there can be laws by the government as it relates to that type of content, and that's why it's a lot harder to find that, to have that content, to have a business like that, to get a license like that, to get zoning, because you can't, if you're trying to get a type of business like that in your area, it has to be zoned that way, and it has to be approved, and you can't, and if you don't get approved, you can't say, hey, you're violating my First Amendment rights. That's completely off the table. So that's one of the areas where they've said that, you can't do stuff like that. So that's kind of, in a lot of the cases too that we've come up with, the First Amendment relate to, there were some cases where in World War II, and this kind of runs into freedom of religion too, where individuals weren't saying the Pledge of Allegiance because it was against their religion, and because of how it was in World War II, they said it didn't violate First Amendment, but later that kind of got reversed after World War II and created more protections, but that was kind of one of the exceptions to that. And that was kind of a First Amendment and freedom of religion issue. And then also burning of the flag too. Originally thought that was an issue, but now not necessarily First Amendment issue of burning of the flag. And I think that's important too, is having, because that is kind of speech against the government, and even though it, in our society, how that's viewed can be, a very strong message but also if people want to do it, then I think that that's something that should be protected. And you had a lot of other issues too, like a lot of these civil rights First Amendment issues came up when the Ku Klux Klan was pretty prominent. And, somebody was on the courthouse in a Ku Klux Klan suit, all dressed in his suit, and the Supreme Court came out and said that he can do that. That's nothing the government can do to say, hey, you have to take that off, unless he was inciting violence too. So even these strong messages that maybe society as a whole doesn't agree with, and does and is related to maybe an organization that incites violence and does violence as well to others. If you're wearing something that shows that you're affiliated with that type of group, that is protected under the First Amendment, which again I think is important. I mean, as from a societal standpoint, ethically, it doesn't, to a lot of people, it doesn't sit well. But it's again protecting those strong principles and making sure that the government isn't stepping in and infringing on your First Amendment rights. So that's it in a nutshell. This is Brian Jackson. Like and subscribe if you want to hear more about the law, First Amendment, other areas of the law, and we'll talk to you next time.